On a stormy night, the city streets were cloaked in a heavy silence, interrupted only by the relentless pattering of rain against asphalt and the faint glow of flickering streetlights. Inside a parked police cruiser, Officer David Parker sat in pensive quiet, his hand idly adjusting the strap of his tactical vest. His sharp blue eyes scanned the deserted surroundings, a subtle tension etched across his face. Beside him sat Rex, a German shepherd with a coat that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Rex sat upright, alert, his piercing gaze locked onto the rain-slicked streets as if ready for action at any moment. The bond between man and dog was unspoken, yet palpable. A partnership forged in trust and countless missions, some of which had pushed both to their limits. David's mind wandered briefly to memories of past assignments. He carried a weight, a silent guilt from a mission that had gone wrong months ago, a decision he still second-guessed late at night. He glanced at Rex, whose calm but focused demeanor never faltered. The dog had been his rock through it all, a steady reminder that not all battles were fought alone. Tonight, however, felt different. Something about the air carried an edge, a tension that knotted itself deep in David's gut. As if on cue, the crackle of the radio broke the uneasy silence. The dispatcher's voice, firm but tinged with urgency, echoed through the cabin. Unit 5, reports of suspicious activity at the old warehouse on Western Drive, possible armed individuals on site. Proceed with caution. Backup en route. David inhaled deeply, the weight of the call sinking in. His gaze met Rex's for a fleeting second, as if seeking reassurance. "Well, buddy, it's just us for now," he murmured, reaching over to pat Rex's head. The dog's ears twitched at the familiar touch, his sharp eyes flicking back to the window. He let out a low, approving rumble, a sound that David had come to interpret as both acknowledgement and readiness. Sliding out of the cruiser, David adjusted his holster and secured his flashlight, the rain immediately soaking through his uniform. The old warehouse loomed ahead, an ominous silhouette against the pitch-black sky. Its peeling walls and rusted metal doors stood like silent sentinels, weathered by time and neglect. Rainwater cascaded off the cracked shingles above, each droplet adding to the rhythmic symphony of the storm. For a moment, David stood still, allowing his senses to adjust to the darkness and the eerie quiet that surrounded them. "Stay close, Rex," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. Rex trotted to his side, his movements precise and deliberate. The dog's nose worked overtime, sniffing the damp air while his ears twitched at every faint noise. Together, they moved toward the warehouse, their steps careful and calculated. Each sound, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the creak of a distant metal hinge, was amplified in the oppressive silence, sending a chill down David's spine. As they approached the entrance, David crouched low, his hand instinctively resting on his sidearm. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing broken crates, rusted tools, and a faint trail of footprints leading inside. He glanced down at Rex, whose posture had stiffened, his body taut with anticipation. "This could go sideways real fast," David muttered under his breath. Before stepping through the threshold, he knelt beside Rex, his hand resting briefly on the dog's back. "Listen to me, Rex," he said, his voice low but firm. "If something happens, if I can't—" His voice caught for a second, before he swallowed hard and continued. "You need to get out of here. Do you understand? Don't wait for me." Rex tilted his head slightly, his intelligent eyes locked onto David's with an expression that seemed almost human. As if in response, The dog nudged David's arm gently, a small but resolute gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. David couldn't help but smile, faintly, despite the tension gripping him. "All right, let's do this." Together, they crossed into the shadows of the warehouse. The air inside was damp and heavy, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust and oil. Rain dripped from the broken ceiling above, each droplet echoing like a ticking clock. The vast, cavernous space stretched out before them, filled with stacks of crates and forgotten machinery cloaked in darkness. David's grip on his flashlight tightened as his eyes darted from shadow to shadow. Rex stayed close, his nose brushing the ground as he tracked unseen scents, his every movement exuding focus and discipline. The bond between them, forged in countless moments like these, was an unspoken agreement. Neither would leave the other behind. Yet, as the rain continued to pour outside and the silence grew heavier with each passing second, a feeling David couldn't quite shake settled deep in his chest. Something was waiting for them in the darkness, and it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself. Inside the warehouse, the oppressive darkness wrapped around David Parker and Rex like a shroud. The faint glow of his flashlight barely pierced through the shadows, casting flickering beams onto rusted metal and broken crates scattered haphazardly across the damp concrete floor. Every drop of rain that trickled through the cracked ceiling seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the silence in a way that made the air feel thick and heavy. David's heart pounded steadily in his chest, his breathing controlled yet tense. This wasn't his first high-risk situation, but tonight carried a weight he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the eerie emptiness of the warehouse. It was the way Rex moved beside him, every muscle in the German Shepherd's body taut and ready, his ears twitching with acute awareness. Rex knew something David didn't, and that silent understanding between them made David's grip tighten around his flashlight. They moved cautiously, their synchronized steps a dance of precision honed over years of working together. David's flashlight caught the faint trail of footprints leading deeper into the warehouse, damp marks pressed into the dirt and grime. His pulse quickened. Someone was here. His mind flickered back to the dispatcher's warning. Possible armed individuals. A small, nagging voice in his head whispered that this wasn't just an ordinary break-in. The methodical placement of crates and the undisturbed dust along the other pathways suggested that whoever was here knew the layout well. Rex paused abruptly, his nose hovering over the ground. His low growl sent a ripple of unease through David, but it also grounded him. Rex had never steered him wrong. Kneeling slightly, David lowered his voice to a whisper, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "You smell something, buddy?" Rex responded with a sharp look, his body lowering defensively as his growl deepened. David knew that look. It wasn't just curiosity, it was warning. He shifted his flashlight toward the direction Rex was facing, the beam dancing over a stack of crates before landing on a darkened corner of the warehouse. The air there seemed still, too still, as though even the rain dared not intrude. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clatter shattered the silence, a wrench perhaps, tumbling to the ground. The sound ricocheted off the walls, its echo amplifying the tension. David's instincts kicked in immediately. "Stay," he commanded Rex firmly, raising a hand to signal him to halt. His weapon was drawn now, the cold metal steady in his grasp, despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. But before David could take another step, the darkness exploded with motion. A shadow lunged from behind the crates, too fast for David to fully process. His body moved on instinct, twisting as he tried to evade, but the searing pain in his left side stopped him cold. The world tilted as he staggered backward, his vision blurring with the sudden onslaught of agony. His hand instinctively pressed against his side, and when he pulled it away, his palm was slick with blood. The flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam casting erratic light across the scene as David collapsed onto the wet concrete. His breaths came in shallow, labored gasps, and his mind raced to stay conscious. Through the haze, he could see Rex, his silhouette framed in the faint glow of the flashlight. The dog stood like a sentinel, unmoving and unyielding, his gaze locked on the darkened corner where the attack had come from. "Rex," David rasped, his voice barely audible over the pounding of the rain outside. Stay back." But Rex didn't budge. The German Shepherd's growl deepened, a sound so primal and fierce it seemed to vibrate through the floor. His sharp eyes never left the figures now emerging from the shadows, 3 of them silhouetted against the faint light spilling in from a distant window. One held what appeared to be a weapon, while the others whispered to each other in low, menacing tones. David's fingers twitched toward his radio, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of pain and determination. He couldn't let this end here. Not like this. He had to signal for help, but his strength was fading fast. Rex, sensing his partner's struggle, let out a bark so commanding it momentarily froze the figures in their tracks. One of the men sneered, stepping forward with a mocking confidence. "It's just a dog," he muttered, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. Rex's stance lowered, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. His growl wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Every movement, every shift of his body spoke of unwavering loyalty and the willingness to protect David at all costs. "Grab the cop and let's go," one of the men hissed, his voice laced with urgency. David, barely clinging to consciousness, mustered what little strength he had. His voice, weak but resolute, cut through the tension. "Rex, no." But Rex wasn't listening anymore, not to commands that went against his instincts. As one of the men moved closer, Rex lunged forward, his bark a deafening roar of defiance. The movement was so sudden, so ferocious, that the man stumbled back, tripping over a loose crate. The other 2 hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Then, piercing through the storm of fear and aggression, the distant sound of sirens broke the air. The men froze, their plan unraveling, as the flashing red and blue lights painted the warehouse walls. Rex stood his ground, ensuring they didn't take another step toward David. The figures retreated, their boots splashing in puddles as they disappeared into the shadows. Only when the last of them was out of sight did Rex turn back to David, his wet fur brushing against the officer's arm. David managed a faint smile, his trembling hand weakly reaching out to Rex. You did good, buddy," he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips, before exhaustion pulled him into unconsciousness. As the sirens grew louder, Rex remained by David's side, a silent guardian. His piercing gaze never wavered, his body a shield against whatever danger might still lurk in the shadows. This was more than duty. This was love, trust, and an unbreakable bond forged in the darkest moments. The wailing sirens drew closer, their echoes bouncing off the rain-soaked walls of the warehouse. Rex stayed rooted by David Parker's side, his fur drenched, but his spirit unyielding. The faint rise and fall of David's chest were the only signs of life, and even though Rex couldn't understand the gravity of the blood staining his partner's uniform, he knew David was in danger. His sharp gaze darted back to the warehouse's shadows, scanning for any sign of movement. The 3 figures who had ambushed David had fled, but Rex wasn't convinced the threat was gone. His instincts screamed vigilance, and those instincts had never failed him or David before. As the flashing red and blue lights finally cut through the thick darkness, the first squad cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. Officers spilled out, their weapons drawn, scanning the area for hostiles. Leading them was Ethan, a seasoned officer and a long-time colleague of David. He was the kind of officer who didn't panic under pressure, but the sight of David lying motionless on the cold, wet ground sent a jolt of alarm through him. "Officer down!" Ethan's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, as he gestured for the paramedics to move in. His boots splashed through puddles as he approached, his eyes flicking between the injured David and Rex, who stood protectively over his partner. Rex let out a low, guttural growl as Ethan drew closer, his instincts still on high alert. His body was a shield, his eyes flashing with a message that was clear to anyone who dared approach. "You'll only pass if I trust you." "It's okay, Rex," Ethan said softly, crouching low to meet the dog's fierce gaze. He kept his voice calm but steady, a quiet reassurance in the chaos. "I'm here to help him. You've done your part, boy. Let us take it from here." Rex hesitated, his sharp ears twitching as if weighing the truth in Ethan's tone. Finally, with a reluctant step back, Rex allowed Ethan and the paramedics to reach David. But he didn't stray far, pacing anxiously as they worked, his eyes never leaving his partner. The paramedics moved quickly, applying pressure to David's wound and lifting him onto a stretcher. "Critical, but he's got a chance," one of them muttered, his voice tinged with urgency as they loaded David into the ambulance. Rex whined softly, his tail drooping as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the vehicle sped away, taking David with it. For a brief moment, the rain seemed louder, the world emptier. But Rex didn't dwell on the absence of his partner for long. There was still work to be done. Ethan, noticing Rex's restlessness, gave him a reassuring pat on the side. "We're not done yet, are we, boy?" he murmured. Rex's ears perked up, his focus sharpening as if to say, "Not even close." The officers spread out to search the warehouse, their flashlights cutting through the damp, musty air. Ethan stayed close to Rex, trusting the dog's instincts more than any equipment they had on hand. The tension was palpable as they moved deeper into the labyrinth of crates and rusted machinery. The shadows seemed alive, shifting with every flicker of light. Rex froze suddenly, his nose low to the ground, sniffing intently. A low growl rumbled from his throat as he turned toward a stack of crates. Ethan immediately signaled the other officers, his hand instinctively moving to his holstered weapon. "What is it, Rex?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Without waiting for a command, Rex darted forward, his movements precise and deliberate. He stopped at the base of the crates, his sharp eyes locked on a small, inconspicuous corner. Ethan followed, his flashlight beam landing on what appeared to be a hidden compartment built into the wall. "Cover me," Ethan ordered the nearest officer as he carefully pried the compartment open. What he found made his stomach churn. Inside were crates filled with weapons, guns, ammunition, and explosives. But that wasn't all. Ethan pulled out a stack of water-damaged maps and documents, spreading them out on the ground under the flashlight. His eyes scanned the markings, and his breath hitched. The maps were detailed blueprints of critical infrastructure across the city. Bridges, power stations, even a hospital. Dates and times were scrawled next to each location, coinciding with upcoming public events. This wasn't just a break-in or a botched robbery. It was something far more sinister. They were planning a coordinated attack, Ethan muttered, his voice heavy with the weight of the discovery. He turned to Rex, who sat nearby, watching him intently. "Good boy, you just saved hundreds, maybe thousands of lives." But Rex wasn't finished. The dog's ears twitched, his nose sniffing the air again. He let out a sharp bark, his body tense as he stared toward the far end of the warehouse. Ethan followed his line of sight, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Stay sharp," Ethan called out to the other officers. "There's more." Rex moved with purpose, leading the team toward a large container shoved against the back wall. The lock had been broken, and the door was slightly ajar. Rex stopped just short of the container, sniffing the air and letting out a low, warning growl. Ethan motioned for silence, gesturing for the team to fan out. With careful precision, he approached the container, his flashlight illuminating the narrow gap in the door. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were more weapons and a bag filled with cash and forged IDs. But before Ethan could process the discovery, a sudden noise erupted from above, a sharp creak of metal, followed by the unmistakable sound of movement. Rex reacted first, barking loudly and lunging toward the source of the sound. The officers pointed their flashlights upward, catching a glimpse of a figure perched on a steel beam. "Up there!" Ethan shouted as the suspect leapt down, landing on a stack of crates before making a break for it. Rex didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed, the German shepherd sprinted after the fleeing figure, his barks echoing through the warehouse. Ethan and the other officers followed, their adrenaline spiking as they pursued both man and dog deeper into the shadows. Rex's determination was unyielding, his movements a blur of precision as he closed the gap between him and the suspect. This wasn't just a chase, it was a race against time, and Rex wasn't about to lose. What Rex uncovered next would not only solidify his role as the night's hero, but also reveal the full extent of the danger lurking in the darkness. The rain had finally started to ease, its relentless downpour now reduced to a faint drizzle that clung to the cold air around the shipping yard. The early morning sky was a dull gray, shrouded in mist, as Ethan and his team arrived at the vast expanse of containers. The echoes of their tires screeching to a halt cut through the silence, but the tension that followed was even louder. Rex jumped down from the cruiser, landing gracefully on the wet pavement, his ears perked and his nose already sniffing the air. He didn't wait for a command. He didn't need one. His instincts had been honed through countless missions, and this time, the stakes felt higher than ever. Ethan surveyed the scene, his sharp eyes scanning the towering stacks of shipping containers that loomed like monoliths under the dim morning light. Each container seemed to hold its own secrets, and somewhere among them was the cash they'd been tipped off about. Materials that could wreak unimaginable havoc on the city. David's bloodied face flashed briefly in Ethan's mind, a stark reminder of why they were here. He couldn't let his fallen colleague's bravery go to waste. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, though the words were more for himself than Rex. Rex moved ahead, his posture low, his tail rigid, a clear sign that he was already on a scent. Ethan followed closely, his flashlight cutting through the misty air, its beam bouncing off the metallic walls of the containers. The other officers fanned out behind him, their weapons drawn, their steps cautious. Every sound, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots, the distant drip of rainwater, felt amplified in the eerie stillness. Suddenly, Rex stopped. His body stiffened, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Ethan froze, his heart pounding, as he followed Rex's gaze to a cluster of containers near the far edge of the yard. The dog's nose hovered just above the ground, his head tilting as he sniffed, then let out a sharp bark that echoed across the yard. "He's onto something," Ethan said, signaling for the team to approach. They moved quickly but carefully, their flashlights slicing through the haze. Rex led them to a specific container, its lock broken and the door slightly ajar. Ethan's gut twisted, a sign of either their luck or their peril. He raised a hand to halt the team, crouching low beside Rex as he peered inside. The faint beam of his flashlight revealed rows of crates stacked neatly against the walls. As Ethan stepped closer, the smell of chemicals hit him, a sharp, acrid scent that made his stomach churn. He pulled open one of the crates and froze. Inside were materials unmistakably meant for destruction: detonators, wires, and enough explosives to level an entire city block. Ethan's throat tightened. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to the nearest officer. "Secure the area. No one gets in or out without clearance. This is bigger than we thought." But Rex wasn't done. The dog's ears twitched, his nose lifting to the air as he let out another bark, this one louder, more urgent. He darted toward the far end of the yard, his movements swift and purposeful. Ethan barely had time to react. "Follow him!" Ethan shouted, already breaking into a run. The officers scrambled to keep up as Rex weaved through the maze of containers, his barks growing sharper with every step. Then, from the shadows, two figures emerged, sprinting toward the edge of the yard. Ethan's flashlight caught them mid-run, their faces masked, but their desperation clear. "Stop! Police!" Ethan's voice rang out, but the suspects didn't slow. Rex surged ahead, his powerful strides eating up the distance between him and the nearest man. The suspect glanced back, his panic evident as he fumbled for something in his jacket. Before he could act, Rex lunged, his teeth catching the fabric of the man's sleeve and pulling him to the ground with a force that left no room for retaliation. The man let out a cry, his hands shooting up in surrender as officers closed in. But the second suspect wasn't stopping. He bolted toward a parked truck at the edge of the yard, yanking open the door and scrambling inside. Ethan's stomach dropped as he saw the man fumbling with the keys. If he escaped with even a fraction of the explosives, the consequences would be catastrophic. "Rex, go!" Ethan commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Rex didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed, he leapt onto the truck's running board, barking fiercely. The sound startled the man, causing him to drop the keys onto the floor of the cab. Rex's growl was low and menacing, his body poised to strike. The suspect froze, his hands trembling as he slowly raised them in surrender. Ethan and the other officers arrived seconds later, pulling the man from the truck and securing him in handcuffs. Rex jumped down, his chest heaving, but his focus unwavering. "Good boy," Ethan breathed, crouching to scratch behind Rex's ears. The dog leaned into the touch for a moment before turning his attention back to the yard, his instincts still on high alert. With both suspects in custody, the team returned to the container to secure the explosives. The weight of the discovery was heavy. This wasn't just a successful mission. It was a race against time, and they had barely crossed the finish line. Ethan glanced at Rex, who stood proudly by his side, his fur damp, but his spirit unshaken. "You saved us all, Rex," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. The other officers nodded in agreement, their gazes filled with admiration for the dog who had not only led them to the evidence, but also ensured the mission's success. As the team loaded the explosives into evidence trucks, Ethan looked out at the rain-soaked yard, the gravity of the night settling over him. There would be more questions to answer, more leads to follow. But for now, the city was safe, and it was all thanks to Rex, a hero on 4 legs whose unwavering loyalty and courage had turned the tide in their darkest hour. The first rays of dawn began to break through the clouds as the officers returned to the station, the weight of the night still heavy on their shoulders. The once relentless rain had eased into a gentle drizzle, leaving a faint sheen on the wet streets. Rex, still alert despite the night's chaos, trotted beside Ethan, his coat damp and his steps purposeful. Around them, the atmosphere was thick with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The team had done what seemed impossible. They had thwarted a devastating attack, apprehended the suspects, and secured the explosives. Yet it was Rex's presence that stood as a constant reminder of the extraordinary courage and loyalty it had taken to bring them to this moment. Inside the station, the tension began to shift. Officers gathered around the evidence table, where maps, weapons, and documents lay spread out like puzzle pieces, waiting to reveal the full picture. The grim realization of what they had stopped settled over everyone. The targets on the maps, bridges, power grids, a hospital, weren't just places. They were lifelines for the city, spaces filled with innocent people. If not for Rex's keen instincts and unwavering determination, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Ethan stood silently beside Rex, his hand resting lightly on the dog's back. As much as he wanted to bask in the relief of the moment, his thoughts kept drifting back to David, who was still in the hospital, fighting to recover. He had seen the bond between David and Rex, a connection forged in countless missions and moments of shared trust. Tonight, that bond had not only saved David's life, but the lives of countless others. The station doors swung open, and a voice called out, "Ethan, how's Parker?" It was Captain Morales, her expression a mix of concern and gratitude. Ethan straightened and nodded. "Critical but stable," he replied. "He's got a long road ahead, but he'll make it, thanks to Rex." At the mention of his name, Rex's ears perked up, and he looked up at Ethan with his intelligent, amber eyes. Morales crouched down, her usually stern demeanor softening as she scratched behind Rex's ears. "You're a hero, boy," she said gently. "We all owe you more than we can ever repay." The station buzzed with activity as officers worked to piece together the evidence and connect it to the larger network behind the plot. But amidst the commotion, Ethan noticed something about Rex. He was restless. His tail swayed slightly, and he let out a soft whine. Ethan crouched down, looking into the dog's eyes. "You miss him, don't you?" he asked softly. Rex nudged Ethan's hand, the gesture both a confirmation and a plea. Ethan smiled faintly and stood. "All right, buddy, let's go see him." When they arrived at the hospital, the sterile smell and quiet hum of machines greeted them. David was lying in a bed, his face pale, but his chest rising and falling steadily. As soon as Rex entered the room, his demeanor changed. His tail wagged furiously, and he bounded to David's side, nuzzling his partner's hand. David stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. A faint smile spread across his face as he saw Rex. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with warmth. He lifted a trembling hand to stroke Rex's fur. "You saved me, didn't you?" Rex licked David's hand, his actions gentle and full of affection. For a moment, the room was silent, the bond between man and dog speaking louder than words ever could. Ethan watched from the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. He couldn't help but smile as he witnessed the reunion. It was a reminder of what they had all fought for that night. Not just the city, but the bonds that made their lives worth protecting. As the sun finally broke through the clouds outside, Ethan reflected on the lessons of the night. Courage wasn't just about charging into danger, it was about loyalty, trust, and the willingness to stand by someone, no matter the cost. Rex had shown that in every step, every bark, every decision. He wasn't just a dog, he was a partner, a protector, and a symbol of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. The city might never know Rex's name, but for those who had been there, David, Ethan, Morales, and the rest of the team, they would never forget. That night, in the pouring rain and under the weight of darkness, Rex had reminded them all that even in the bleakest moments, loyalty and love could light the way.